Of the residents of a Rexdale apartment building raided by police last week are protesting today. They're saying police broke the law.
Many say their doors were kicked in and their property damaged, and they allege officers didn't have warrants to enter. CTV's Colin DeMello has that story.
Victimized, vilified, and traumatized. That's how members of the Somali community say they feel after their homes were raided by Toronto police last Thursday. Officers burst into apartments on Dixon Road in the early morning hours, arresting suspects involved in the drug and arms trade. But in the process, the community is accusing police of doing much more damage.
The community members are angry by the destruction of the property, disrespectful comments made by the Toronto police, and the police brutality.
Project Traveler left 43 people facing charges, but members of the community are criticizing police for casting such a wide net.
Don't blame the whole community for the handful of suspects collected. The 43 people arrested under Project Traveler, if convicted of the crimes, deserve to be corrected for the harms that drugs and guns bring into any community.
There are also accusations that the Rob Ford alleged drug scandal sparked the raids in an attempt to take the heat off of Toronto police.
When they're under scrutiny and they're being questioned, if they knew about Rob Ford's dealings with drug dealers and other elements, unsavory elements in the community, why didn't they do something about it?
Members of the community say they now plan on filing official complaints against individual officers. Members of the Somali community also relayed stories of a 60-year-old woman whose home was raided last Thursday. They say she was handcuffed and left half naked on the floor. When she pleaded with Toronto police, an officer, to give her some clothes, she alleges that he looked at her and told her to, quote, die. They are also asking Mayor Rob Ford to come down here and either apologize or at least explain what's been happening in their community. Reporting live, I'm Colin DeMello. Ken and Michelle, over to you. Victimized, vilified, and traumatized. That's how members of the Somali community say they feel after their homes were raided by Toronto police last Thursday. Officers stormed into apartments on Dixon Road in the early morning hours, arresting suspects believed to be involved in the drug and arms trade. But in the process, the community is accusing police of doing much more.
The community members are angry by the destruction of the property, disrespectful comments made by the Toronto police, and the police brutality.
Project Traveler left 43 people facing charges, but members of the Somali community claim police didn't have the proper warrants, that guns were pointed at children, and that frail seniors were put into handcuffs. Toronto police spokesperson Mark Pugas says detectives always have their legal paperwork in order before going in.
Let me be clear, these are enormously disruptive, and they're terrifying operations for the people who are on the other end. You have flash bangs being detonated, you have doors smashed. These are terrifying. Our officers are so mindful of that. They have to look out for their safety, but for the safety of everyone else, including the people who are the subject of warrants. And so they take great care.
All the Somali youths.
There are also accusations that the alleged drug use scandal swirling around Mayor Rob Ford is what sparked these raids.
Well, I think that people were questioning the fact that the police knew that he had some connection to some criminal elements.
Police say the raids came a year after Project Traveler first began. Still, Dixon residents asked the mayor for an apology or at least an explanation. Here's what he had to say.
It's a police investigation. No, I cannot elaborate on anything. It's obviously before the courts now, and it's a police investigation.
The Somali community is now planning to lodge official complaints against the officers who conducted the raids. During those raids, police seized more than 175,000 grams of drugs, $570,000 in cash, 42 firearms, and more than 100 rounds of ammunition. Police say they are working with the community to build confidence, but members of the Somali community say all they have seen is an increased police presence. Reporting live, I'm Colin DeMello. Ken, back to you.
But first, members of the Toronto Somali community are speaking out today, claiming police brutality in the Project Traveler raids from last Thursday. Stephen D'Souza went to the Dixon Road apartments to hear their concerns.
Saida Hersi clutches her 96-year-old mother, Fadimo, who she says was roughed up during last week's police raids.
To translate quite literally, she said, soldier came in and tried to handcuff me and my body convulsed, and then he put me back on the bed.
I put here.
Mercy says she was in another room, forced to the ground face down, handcuffed with a sweater thrown over her face. And when she asked for water,
he said, you died now. I don't care.
Police were at the apartment on Dixon Road targeting her son, Sayedin Abdi. He was arrested and is accused of being a member of the Dixon Bloods gang. He's also facing more than a dozen weapons charges. Today, the Somali community alleged more cases of police brutality, saying they were unfairly targeted during the raids.
Many Somali community members felt victimized, traumatized.
They blame Mayor Rob Ford. The raided buildings have been linked to the scandal surrounding a video of the mayor allegedly smoking from a crack pipe.
If you want to go after Rob Ford, go after him, but don't go after Somali mothers, don't go after Somali seniors, don't go after Somali children.
Toronto police say the raids had nothing to do with Rob Ford.
We planned this operation a year ago, and people must understand the enormous amount of planning and effort that goes into it.
As for the treatment of 96-year-old Fatima Hersi, Mark Pugash says she was treated in hospital and released uninjured. He says the suspects targeted in the raids put their own families at risk.
There are people who seem to think that if thugs move in with their grandparents, that they somehow have sanctuary.
The community says it's not that simple. They've requested a meeting with Chief Bill Blair and that formal complaints are in the works. Stephen D'Souza, CBC.
On June 13 at 3 a.m., units of 320, 330, 340, 390, and 380 were raided by Toronto Police as a part of the investigation called Project Traveler. The purpose of this conference today is that the Somali community wants to ensure the voices and perspectives that the victims that were raided are heard. These victims include senior citizens, children, youth, single mothers, and also youth that were forced to live in a traumatic experiences through no fault on their own. You can refer to Roots of Violence report and Ontario Youth Action Plan for the details of those. We heard stories on last Saturday community town hall meeting that was called in by the victims. And those are shocking stories that are unheard by the media and the Canadian public. And that's why we call you today, so you listen to those compelling stories of the victims of the Somali community. After the raid, many Somali community members felt victimized, traumatized, as a result of reckless manner in which the officers forcibly entered their homes. The community members are angered by the destruction of the property, disrespectful comments made by the Toronto Police, and the police brutality. The residents have shared with us stories and complained no additional resources were provided, such as hiring a trauma counselors or mental health counselors. But instead, more policing was put into them, and in order to create more fear into this community. Today, we will highlight these stories of the victims and excessive force that was used, cultural insensitivity, and the harsh treatment that they got. The actions of both the media and Toronto Police labeling and profiling the entire Somali community on Dixon as a criminal is hurtful. Community that have already experiencing systemic discriminations, systemic barriers, anti-black racism, Islamophobia. The Somali community has further been stigmatized by the actions of some officers involved in the raid. These are the stories that you're going to hear today. And I'm going to start to share with first story. Wazir Duale, please welcome to so that I could tell the first story.
I'm Fawzia Duale, and I grew up in 330 Dixon. My mother and siblings still live there. I'm here today as a concerned citizen. I'll be relating the story of Saida Siddin Hirsi, and I'm going to ask her to come and sit in my chair as I relate her story. It was early in the morning. I had just finished praying and I had decided to go back to sleep. What seemed like minutes later, I heard a terrifying sound. It was like a loud, repetitive thunder. It reminded me of gunshots. I was confused, so I cried out for my daughter. Ayan, Ayan, is the house under fire? Is the house burning? I didn't have time to listen for her reply. I didn't have time to think. The moments that followed were instantaneously fast. I was pinned against a wall, rubber handcuffs holding my hands behind my back, and I was pushed onto the floor by what looked like a soldier. My lower body was exposed, and I begged him to cover me. I was embarrassed to be in a naked state. I wasn't given the dignity to cover myself. So I continued to beg, please, I am Muslim, I am Muslim. When I moved, he pushed me back down and kicked my face, then continued searching the room. He threw clothes onto my head instead of throwing the clothes at least to cover my legs. I began to feel lightheaded, my heart was beating painfully fast, and I asked him for water. Blood pressure, I repeated. He responded with one word, die. I had a minor heart attack. I am 64 years old. I will not accept to be told to die. I will not accept to be brutalized. I have done nothing to deserve the indignity and the force that came with the raids. My religious identity was disrespected. My body was left bruised. How can this be acceptable in any community in Toronto? The fear and anguish was growing when a different team walked in. They were dressed in clothing that I see police officers wear. They were police officers. They brought me over to my daughter and mother, who is nearly 100 years old. They asked me to attend to my mother because she was bleeding and crying. They cut the rubber handcuffs off that the soldier put on me, and I began to speak with my mother. My mother was born in 1917, while Somalia was still a colony during the years of the First World War. This woman, my mother, fell off her bed out of shock and surprise at the commotion. She told me that the soldier tried to handcuff and pin her down, and she began to shake in his arms. He then changed his mind and did not continue to handcuff her, and he placed her on the bed. My mother has been hospitalized for injuries to her head, to her arms and legs, and she is traumatized. Every time she hears the door open, she cries, "The soldiers are coming, they're coming." We don't want treatment like this. Why did they try to handcuff my nearly 100-year-old mother? I heard that they can't use excessive force. Why did they not use common sense instead of detaining an old, frail woman? I could have lost my mother that day. I could have died that day. Who would be responsible? How is this possible? Saida has invited anyone who's interested in seeing her mother to come to her home. She wanted her mother to be here today, but her mother is still in a grave state of shock, and she didn't want any added stress. So any interested parties are welcome to come over. Thank you.